I don't know. Tuesday.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Happy Hour. It's with me, Eileen. We're here at the Creative Academy, and it is October 23rd. So I see a lot of faces that were conference faces, and I think Mel has shared various news. But did anyone want to talk about their success and how they're pitching since we did Pitch-a-Palooza? You're all going to be shy.
I was told actually that I did a very good pitch, and I pitched two novels, so I thought that was a success.
Perfect. I think, did everyone who pitched get a request? I feel like they, Kristen, no? What happened when you pitched?
The first person said, "Oh, I have other things that are too much like that."
I hate that.
And then the second person, well, very lovely, basically was like, "Ooh, I have a colleague at my agency who would be really interested in that." So invited me to sort of basically query that person, and then if it didn't work out, then come back to her. That was an agent though. So yeah. So I don't know. And I mean, it was nice, but it wasn't like definite, like, "Oh, love it, send it to me."
But I mean, so you know, that is in fact how I ended up with my agent. So I queried Don Moss at his agency, knowing that someone else within his agency was a better fit than he was. So I would definitely encourage you to consider following up on that. They have a really good sense of each other's tastes, and so they will sometimes know.
Yeah, she said that everyone had sent her with like a shopping list. So
that sounds about right. So I mean, I think sometimes we think, oh, they didn't, they're just shuffling me off, but it's usually not. If they're talking about a colleague, it's usually someone who has said, I really want something like XYZ. So if you get something like that, Marianne?
Well, just that a query letter that says, I pitched to your colleague so-and-so at the survey, and they recommended that that's a pretty good throw in the door, I think.
It's actually an excellent point as to you are mentioning that in that opening line of the query. I met with your colleague, Mrs. Agent, blah, 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 and she suggested that I query you instead, and then launch into the rest of the query. For everyone else, you're going to want to make sure that you're putting in your query letter or your submission to them that it was requested material. And I would actually encourage you to put that into the subject line as well, requested material, SIC, and then the title of your book, as just a way for them to sort of make that a little bit easier. So make sure that you're doing that. Now, I know, Elisa, you have a deadline coming up. So as I recall, they gave you 3 months to submit. Does that sound right?
Basically, she said if she didn't hear from me within 3 months, she would forget about me. So,
that's a deadline. That's what that is. That's a very honest, and I think you should appreciate a very honest deadline. So that gives you a timeline to work on. Unless people had a specific question that they wanted to bring up, that we might talk a little bit about revisions. And I'm curious if anybody walked away with a piece of from the conference or something that you're now considering trying to weave in. If there was anything for people. Couple nods.
I went to Mahtab's presentation, and she actually did a whole session on her revision process, which is absolutely terrifying. Like it's 2-week long. One of the tools that she uses pretty consistently, she said, on its own takes 2 weeks. Which, I was doing something slightly similar, or at least I'd started it, but I think let's amp that up.
Now, did she have a handout at all?
Yes, she did. She's actually taken, actually I'll grab it, she taken her processes from other sources. Like she's like, oh, I didn't invent this. I'm just, I just kind of, she amalgamated it. So she has, she suggested she has 3 things she uses, and she says she uses a combination, at least 2 out of the 3 times she revises. So,
can you guys hang on 1 second? There's someone at my door.
oh, that's funny. I keep expecting. I'm surprised my dogs aren't going crazy with that. They normally.
Kitty didn't even flinch.
Yes, I noticed that.
Not real dogs. Not
You know
real
what?
dogs.
We were gonna try and smuggle our cat into Whistler. We're not supposed to have pets here. And when we got my stepson is going to be staying and looking after the cat, and when we got here, they gave us a notice saying, oh, we're doing our annual pest inspection, and we're going to have a canine unit coming into coming into all the units, you know, all from like 9 to 5, like tomorrow and the next day, and they would have found one giant pest. So we're very lucky we didn't bring him
This time.
Yeah.
Hey, good morning.
Sorry about that, guys. We are having construction done here at the house, here at Chez Cook. So there are work people arriving and much barkage to be done.
Yeah.
Men in
Yes.
boots are very upsetting.
Yes, you would be correct. You share the feelings of my dogs. Who
In
are
my family, Eileen, they're known as plumbers, regardless of which trade they actually practice.
It's actually kind of a delightful character detail. It's actually sort of wonderful. So I'm going to highlight for people, I'm not sure if you remember, but there is actually a revisions checklist that is in your resource library. So those of you who are to sort of drill down into things, that may be a place that you want to start. So I wanted to kind of highlight to people, it's kind of broken down, so it has some different options for you to look at as you break into it. But it's definitely looking at the idea, and you know, Kirsten, you might want to speak up about what you learned in your workshop on that, but sort of breaking into kind of different areas. So it breaks it down for you for really big picture stuff. So things talking about just basic story things. So, and the first and the most basic is, do you actually enjoy the story yourself as a reader? I'm guessing that we're already pretty much on those kinds of things. But then it takes you through things in terms of, did you write the story you set out to write, or has the story changed? Are you meeting your genre expectations? Are your story questions answered? How many of you went to Mary Robinette's workshop where she goes through the mice quotient? Lovely. That can be a great way to sort of break down and look at certain things. And I'm laughing because one moment, we have a secret guest.
Hello.
I went to a stressing characters one, and that is.
Hang on, I'm going to say again.
I went to a stressing your characters out one, and that has actually given me actionable things that I'm going to be doing during my revision.
Oh, awesome. Yay.
Very awesome.
Yesterday I watched the Relationship Axes podcast, so that was new and excellent for me. So awesome. Thank you.
I was listening to Writing Excuses while I was working out this morning at 6 a.m. I have to say.
Why were you working out at 6 a.m.?
Well, that's a whole other problem, but yes.
I'll get back to it.
Secret guest stars. We've never done that in office hours before. That was exciting.
It's cool. You should make it a feature once a month.
Yeah. Wonderful.
I might make it a regular feature. It's going to mean she has to move in here, but she's open. She made pie last night, so she's
Mary can live with me if she's.
Oh, actually, there's a few others who are offering you can stay with them if you need pie. Yeah.
Us Canadians are so nice.
We are wonderful, yes. but I think actually, you know, sort of going full circle, that mice quotient is a wonderful way to sort of look at some of that story structure kinds of things around, you know, what have you opened and then what are you closing? And then sort of drilling down. And I think a few of you have heard me use that sort of example before around almost sort of house renovations. And again, I know for most of you, you're fairly well along on this, but it's really the idea of if you're renovating a house, you start with the first things. You start with, is the foundation solid? Is there broken windows? Is the bathroom spewing sewage? And when you fix those problems, then you can tackle the next round of things, which is we want to open up this kind of room for various things. We want to knock down this wall. We want to redo the cupboards. And when you do those things, then you sort of tackle the next round of things, which is we need new cupboards. And then the next round, which is we need new paint and wallpaper. And you sort of work your way down into final things. So I know most of you who are pitching were much further along than sort of the big general things. And I just have to say, I'm sort of loving watching Elisa's video in the corner because she's slowly taking us on a walk of some sort of place. So the rest of you are all just standing put, but Elisa's getting some distance in. So I like that she's getting her workout in, pitting an office hour.
Eileen, where's that revision checklist?
The revisions checklist can be found in the free resource room and also
on the website?
in your tools. Yeah, okay. On our sites. So make sure to check it out, as I think it kind of gives you that will help you. So does anyone have any questions about how they're going to tackle their revisions or what they need to do? Any specific questions? Go ahead, Bonnie.
I went to your emotional intelligence. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's right. I always want to say quotient.
I was there.
Intelligence, like automatic. And I noticed while you were going over all the different all the different factors, that basically every character I write is me, just with certain of those things twisted. So I was wondering if there's a technique or a way to go into something, change the character so they're less like me. Do you draw upon your own experiences, or do you talk to friends or other people who maybe react differently? Because I noticed I'm the first child in my family, so I've always been the caregiver. So I noticed that I tend to give caregiving type qualities to all my characters. and I don't know what it's like to be the one being taken care of. So I'm not sure how I can come up with it. I didn't even realize that I was doing all my own qualities until I went to your lovely thing.
I'm so glad I couldn't, ruin your day that way. I'm concerned about.
Can I show you a couple books?
Yes, please.
Do you know this one, Bonnie?
Please.
Nope. And then there's this one, of course, which is fine, but I really like this one because this is, it's not meant for writers, but it's a guy, a psychologist, a counselor who took the Myers-Briggs test and expanded it and used it for counseling in prisons and schools and corporations. And it's a really detailed discussion of different personality types and like many different subtypes. And along different parameters like communication styles, like different orientations to the world, abstract versus concrete thinking, and how that manifests in terms of behavior and strengths and weaknesses and that sort of thing. And so if you study that and understand where you fit in that spectrum, it also helps you understand how other people are different, and that differences can be good, because I think sometimes we attribute our own characteristics to a character because we think they're like better than everybody else's because we're right, obviously. But if you see how why other people are different and what their orientation is, what their focus or their priorities are, you'll see that the world needs them too. There's sort of this nice fullness And anyway, and it helps. It helps you get outside of your own kind of way of thinking.
Who
Yeah.
is the author again of
No,
Please Understand Me?
David Kiersey,
Can you spell that?
Keirsey. And inside here, it starts with the temperament sorter, which is just like the same thing, right?
It's Myers-Briggs.
It's Myers-Briggs.
Myers-Briggs.
He just uses
Yeah.
slightly different words and his own kind of scoring system. But
Because
can
then he
start
doesn't
with
have to
who
pay
you
the
are.
Myers-Briggs people. That's why.
Yeah. Yeah. So
We'll put in a plug, and I may have mentioned it in that workshop, but your library or your bookstore's psychology / self-help section is one of the best places to find for character details, because you can look at something and say, I want a has addiction, a mother with addiction issues, and then you can look up books of children of alcoholics, for example.
and how it affects them
You
and how they
read sort of-
might react.
Yeah.
Compensate.
And so it'll give you, and also because they are self-help books in most cases, what you do is move that person from maybe maladaptive behaviors to healthy behaviors. So for
Yep.
you, it can often provide an opportunity. What kinds of things move people along that parameter? And can I have my character then take on this? Bonnie, your idea that you're writing kind of different versions of yourself, so your inner dragon that you are channeling, I think it's a very common thing. And I think writers tend to fall into sort of two categories. And one category are constantly are writing very different people, trying to understand them. And other people are writing themselves, often to some degree, understanding themselves, easier to think through how would the character respond in this situation, because we go with our default. So if you have a character and you give a story, an interesting thing to ask yourself is, when you have them respond to something, am I doing the, like, how might what happened to them change things?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm using different parts of me and different stages of life. So of course we all react differently to things as we grow in experience. But
as we hopefully grow from experience.
But yeah, there was a couple of things that kind of was like, oh, my brother would react completely different to that situation based on his emotional intelligence, based on Mary Robinette's relationship sliders and things like that. So I wanted to make my characters a little more different than they've been. And it was kind of a shock to realize all my characters are me. I guess it was easy.
So
sorry, go ahead.
I
was just going to say that One Stop for Writers has this character tool that I haven't used it a lot, but it seems an intriguing kind of way to flesh out a character and think about all the different places where you might inadvertently stick something that doesn't fit in, a reaction or a habit or behavior.
Their trauma one particularly, where you talk about the emotional wound that somebody has had, and not all of them are like big giant trauma things on the writers, helping writers, but sometimes it's very simple things or variations from mild to quite severe, but they kind of list all the types of behaviors that can manifest from that kind of experience, and then that's helpful to understand how they would view the world. Because if you were in a traumatic, I have my cousin's partner was in a really serious car accident where everyone died in the car except for her, and she can only drive in a car when he's driving, and it took years for her to trust him, and she can't fly because her fear is debilitating. being in any kind of vehicle, and which is very problematic for her because she's actually moved from England, and her entire family is in England, and she's here. So she has, out of the 6 or 7 times she's tried to go home, she's only made it there once. And then she had to have basically somebody on the plane with her and be heavily medicated. So yeah, so but that's the kind of stuff that is in the emotional wound. So if you think about an experience or something that's happened to somebody, as a starting point, you can kind of build around it using that tool.
The other thing I like about that character building tool is that they have their thesaurus and lists of things, but you can customize it. So you can have your own story notes in there, and you can do this elsewhere too. It's just really handy to build your character sort of systematically from the ground up based on whatever backstory or wound, and sort of cherry pick the particular behaviors and reactions and emotional responses from the big list that's kind of customized to that character. So rather than just kind of going shopping every single time you need a response, you can create a little kit of parts so you can better customize that character.
I think what's really important to remember, which kind of dovetails on what both of you have just talked about, is keeping in mind it's not just what's happened to your character in the past. So it's not just any past trauma, but it is the story that they tell themselves about that trauma. So they're putting some sort of meaning about what. The example I sometimes get is you could have 2 people go through a situation where they were daddy's girl. Daddy died tragically when they were young. Mom couldn't handle it, became an alcoholic, ended up losing custody of, her kids. The person grows up in and out of foster care and, has this sort of horrific childhood. And one person will come out of that with a whole lot of issues, won't trust other people, will believe, everybody leaves you in the end. You can't trust or believe in anyone. Someone else will go through that same thing and have a rubbish and be all about, I have created my own family, and if I have my own family, then that can never be taken from me. And again, you can see if you're playing with conflict, in one situation you have someone who may not trust anyone, so you're going to be the person who really struggles to make that work, and someone else may be staying in a relationship that they should not stay in because they are afraid to leave or feel like to leave is to do something bad. So you can sort of see how it's not just what happens, but what you in fact take away from what happened that can make a big difference about what your character thinks. So doing something like customizing is really helpful. And again, sort of, I think asking yourself the question, which is really valuable, which is, what is the narrative that my character tells himself about themselves? So an interesting exercise on that is, what are the stories that you tell about yourself? So do you have, sort of, most of us have sort of set examples when people ask us stories. We have certain things we talk about. And why are you choosing those memories? Why are you choosing certain stories to tell people certain things? Like, we build up our own mythology, I guess is what I would say. And I'm totally laughing at Carol. This arm slips in and then she's very carefully slips it back out. So no, at least no one was undressed and walking behind you. I have seen that happen in my SFU course at one point. Someone's husband strolled behind the computer in nothing but his very small, tidy, not completely whiteies. So it can be far more interesting than you might imagine.
I think those are quotables. I don't know if everybody else paused and soaked them in, but the two last things you just said is, why does a character choose certain memories over other ones? And that we build up our own mythology. I don't know if you've said those things before, but I think they bear repeating. in
I
exactly.
love when that happens when I say something smart and somebody's like, that's actually kind of interesting.
That's T-shirt material. I mean, we should.
I know, I'm T-shirt worthy, dang it. Why don't I have a T-shirt? But I do think, and part of it is a reason, like if you do any work as a counselors, we're watching you very carefully, and we are looking at not only what you say, but what you choose to say. So we're often asking questions. Again, if you start with someone, they'll say something like, tell me about your family of origin. What was it like to grow up in your house? And it's very interesting to us how people choose to describe that, both by what they say and by what they don't say. I'm very interested in that. And I'm interested in, when people are not necessarily answering questions. So you would be surprised the number of times when I'll say to someone in a counseling session, what was your relationship like with your mom? And they'll say something like, my mom's a really strong, dynamic woman, which in no way answered the question that I just asked. I'll be like, tell me more.
I have a kind of an interesting anecdote about that. I went with a friend to a night before the wedding cocktail thingy at a bar in a private room with two families, the bride's and the groom's families, that I never knew before, didn't know anything about them, and ended up sitting out on the porch with my friend and this young guy who was one of the cousins, who was a little bit of a black sheep character, but it didn't emerge right away. He was kind of a narcissistic, artistic ne'er-do-well who was clearly living off of charity from his mother. And we were asking, who are you related to here? Just kind of general talk. And he referred to his mother, who was standing over there, as what's that? Some TV show series about some super competent woman doctor, and he
Fraser?
called his mother Dr. whatever, Laura something, and even added an extra adjective on that about how together she was and how competent and how in charge of everything was. And that's what he called his mom. Like, it was like 7 words long. And that's, every time you referred to her, it was like the competent Dr. Laura Anderson or whatever. Some TV show that I'm supposed to know, but I recognized it at the time. Anyway, it just was so loaded. It was hilarious.
Well, and I think the truth is sometimes people aren't honest with themselves. And that, in terms of when I'm looking at manuscripts and giving feedback to people, is I think sometimes we default to having our characters have all this insight. So they say and do exactly what they're thinking and saying. They have all the insights, so they know exactly how they feel about their mother. They know exactly what their relationship is with that person. They are very in touch with their strengths and their weaknesses. They know what they're doing. My hunch is, in general, if your character is that together, there's probably a problem with your manuscript, because in most cases that is part of it's part of the human condition, as we are all figuring ourselves out, particularly if you're writing characters that are younger, because again, the truth is most of us spend our adult lives figuring out who we are and what's going on. So I think it's that interesting question to sometimes have the exercise where you have your character describe themselves, so they write out what they feel their strengths and their weaknesses are. And then pop yourself into the head of another character in the story, their parent, their friend, their enemy, and have that person comment on what are their strengths and their weaknesses. And then to have someone else do it. I don't know if anyone has ever been through sort of, it's a counseling exercise that will sometimes happen if you have someone who may be struggling with self-esteem or struggling with, issues of self, is we'll say to that person, what I'd like you to do is ask 5 or 6 of your close friends or family members to list 5 or 10 adjectives to describe you. And people often will sometimes cry when they're getting those back. And it's interesting to sort of go through with someone and sort of say, is that how you see yourself? And in most cases, if you've had people describe sort of 10 different adjectives, in many cases, there's usually 6 or 7 where they're like, yeah, I know that, I'm reasonably smart, or I know that I'm the funny one in the family, or I know that, I'm generally a kind person. So it doesn't surprise me to see that on my adjective list. But there might be something that takes them surprise because it is not, in fact, how they see themselves. And it'll be something that, for that, interesting if it shows up on several people's sheet. I went through this process, something else, and a few people had put on the sheet when they were describing me stylish, which I found hysterical because I don't remotely see myself that way. And certainly not this morning as I'm looking into the camera where I haven't yet cleansed myself. But it's that thing around, I think I still see myself through the eyes of who I was in high school. Because when we talk again about that mythology and we sort of carry that around, in high school, I was that extraordinarily awkward person, very insecure, was constantly sort of looking to figure that out. So for me, it was that thing where I guess logically, I know that now that I'm almost 50, I've learned how to dress myself. But in my mind, I'm still that person in high school who has no idea. I grew very tall. I'm 5'8", and I grew this tall in grade 6. You do not want to be 5'8". And I also got these boobs in grade 6 and 7.
Sometimes if we suffer from one particular kind of insecurity or humiliation as a child or a teen, and it becomes part of our self-image, we'll work extra hard at compensating for that. And
Are you saying my shoes are a compensation?
No. It just gave me this idea because you are a stylish person. But what I'm saying is that you may have paid more attention to choosing your clothes, grooming, putting forward a professional image or whatever, precisely because of that self-image of not, looking the way you would like to look or fitting in or feeling embarrassed about something. And so because you spend your life compensating for it, you actually end up being quite competent in that area, whatever it is, I mean, for me, I was so painfully shy that I could never speak up or participate or rebut or think of a thing to say in any situation. And I suffered for decades. And I think sometimes I'm too loud now and speak up too much because I'm still compensating for not being a wallflower. If you see where I'm going with that example.
I actually can relate to that too, but I compensate for my height because I wasn't 5'8" in grade 6. I think that took me grade 8 to get there. But I've always been really tall, and I've had to pull back because people are always shaming me for my height. Oh, you're so tall, as if they're envious, and it's shameful that I'm tall and they're not. So I
find that fascinating, that terminology, that there's versus when I hear someone say you're so tall, I think they're admiring it.
Oh, there's definitely an admiration, but there was also anger on it. Like, you bitch, you're so tall. And I had childhood thing where I wasn't allowed to play certain games because I was tall. Like, you can't play tetherball because you're an inch taller than her, and that makes you a better player. And so it was a subject of bullying in my youth. So.
Yeah, that's what stays with you, right?
It's exactly what stays with you. So sort of thinking about what are those pressure points for your character where there's an insecurity for them that, I think that's a really great point, Mary, that they are possibly then overcompensating for. but they may still feel a lot of insecurity about that. And so, you know, I do find it interesting. There are those things that we take out, and some people then own it, right? Like, and it almost becomes a badge of honor. So I have another friend, Lisa, strangely enough, who's apparently I like to hang out with tall people, but not universally, because there are many of you petite ones that I like quite a bit. Bonnie, I'm looking at you. So, you know, where she was quite tall, she hated being tall growing up. And now she wears like stilettos. Like she's 5'11", and she goes out of her way to wear high heels. I think she desperately misses the 80s, because I think she'd like to have even taller hair if she gets it. Like for her now, it's a little bit of a fuck you. Where she has now almost gone to the far end of it, but I think, to be honest, part of that is still the sensitive part. Like it's still the soft, squishy part of her that is feeling defensive about that. And the way to sometimes have a defense is the best offense.
Yeah,
so again, that's maybe something to consider.
Almost, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's that thing where she is reacting to it. Bonnie.
I was thinking maybe someone else has another issue that they're going to work in revision. I'm feeling rather insecure here.
Not just short. There, she's getting shorter and shorter as she goes. But yeah, I think, you know, looking at those things and being the idea, I think with revision for me, or one of the things to layer into that is, have I been too honest with these characters? Have I had them know exactly what they're thinking and feeling? So we've talked before that sometimes if you're trying to layer some more emotion into the page, is to, you know, look at a page of your manuscript and say to yourself, the emotion the character's feeling in this scene. Okay, they're feeling anger. And then, of course, my first thing is, like, let's really drill. Are they angry? Are they enraged? Are they irritated? Are they frustrated? Like, drill down, because I think sometimes we use, you know, these kind of larger placeholders, and we can be a little bit more specific. That's what we're good at. So now we've drilled down and we've decided that what they are is irritated and annoyed. And then I think an interesting question to layer that on top of that is, are they aware of that? Say, for example, they have dogs that won't stop barking because construction people. Lots and lots of plumbers in our house, Marianne. Many, many plumbers, and we have feelings about that.
I actually struggle. I think I've asked you about this before, Eileen, but when I want one of my characters to be in denial about something, and something happens that pushes their buttons and they have a strong emotional reaction to that, whatever that might be. It might be fight or flight or avoid or something. Sometimes I have trouble coming up with a credible coping behavior that fits the thing that they're lying to themselves about. Yeah, if you get where I'm going with that. Like,
I think you have to know two pieces of that. You have to know, so going back to the original, you know, this is a character who feels irritated and annoyed, but I'm going to decide that they don't know that they feel irritated and ignored. So what is it that they think they are feeling? What are the emotions that they are confusing? So what are they? And then sometimes it's around asking yourself, like, why is it I feel that I'm not owning that? So is that part of my personal mythology? Because I'm the ultimate mother. I am the uber mother. I make lunches where I carve things out of sandwiches and carrot. I do these things. And if I'm irritated and annoyed with my kids, that means I'm not being a good mother. So I can't let myself feel that, because that's contrary to my mythology. So that may be one kind of thing.
I probably shouldn't be laughing this hard, but it's It's really great.
No mocking me.
How
Like
much
they
work
will
she
come
has.
to me and then they're like, now we're done talking to you.
So the idea is that the emotion that they're feeling is in conflict with their self-image.
Often it's either in conflict with their self-image, or there is some reason that they will not allow themselves to own that. So one thing, for example, is a lot of men will confuse fear or sadness with anger. So they will allow themselves to be angry because they don't allow fearful or to be sad. Like those are emotions that they're not comfortable with. And so they will default into something else.
I don't know
It's
what
often
you're
the
talking
opposite. Tony's becoming angry and agitated with that. With some desk flipping. How dare you? But sometimes it's even the idea of, I don't know how many women, and it's usually women, but not universally, but how many women have the experience where you're absolutely livid, you're beyond angry, and you're crying.
Yeah.
And so people will around you and usually in that case, you know that you're angry. Like if you've ever had the situation where someone's like, it's going to be okay. And you're like, I'm not sad, I'm angry. But it's like our bodies and the way that we're socialized, it's like somehow not as okay. And so the strong emotion that is acceptable for us to feel is to feel distraught. And so our body will almost default into this moment where we're, crying and in tears and all upset about something, even though what we're actually feeling is anger and rage. But that's not acceptable for us. In the same ways that sometimes for men, it's not acceptable for them to be scared or upset. So that can be sort of something. So do they know, I think in a lot of cases, do they know what they're feeling is a really good place to sort of start. Because if they're not in touch with their feelings, two things that allows for. So first off is conflict. And you guys know I do love me some conflict. So that just allows us to sort of layer in because they're reacting and doing certain things, but they're not actually working towards their goal. They're often contrary to it because they're self-sabotaging. So that allows that. And then my second theory, which you guys have also heard before, is I believe every book is a mystery. So the reader is reading along, wondering, what's going to happen? How is that person going to react that way? Are they doing those things? And they're picking up clues. And so when we show a character behaving in one way where for the reader, they're having suspicion that the character maybe doesn't feel that way. So you have a character say, yes, Tony, I would love nothing more than to go out on a date with you tomorrow night. She said, twisting the rings on her finger. Like for the reader, they hear that and they're like, I'm not so sure that character really wants to go on that date with Tony, or there's something else going on. I'm not sure if she, like there's those kind of subtexts that you can use, whether that's with physical clues or some kind of internal thing where the reader is like, I don't think this character is being as honest maybe with themselves or with the other characters.
Aw, puppy.
And I also have a Westie.
Do you?
I thought perhaps you had abducted my dog. Yes. Mine's barking crazily right now. I'd love to see her later.
So yeah, that's really helpful to break it down a bit. Thank you.
Yeah, so think about, and I think that mythology is probably a good place to start, is if I'm not being honest with what I feel, why is that happening? And is it I'm scared of that emotion, is I'm scared of where that emotion might lead me, or that is not how I choose to see myself. Again, I'm the perfect mother, I do all these things. And so if I find my kids irritating and annoying, that somehow means I'm not a good mother, versus meaning that you are like every mother ever in the history of time. One of the other plugs I'm going to put in as we're sort of scrolling through and talking is thinking about your, and there is the workshop on setting that's in the academy for you. And the exercise that's in there that is really, really helpful is sit down for yourself and, for example, describe the room that you're in right now. And then I want you to describe the room again as if you were writing a horror novel. And then describe the room one last time as if you were a character from the 1600s who had somehow time portaled into your office. And the reason that exercise is useful is most of the time I find when we write, particularly drafts, we're doing the first level. So we're describing the space for the reader. This is what this office looks like. But on those second rounds, we can do the other two things, which is, are there particular things we can pick out that would help match the tone or feel? So if you have a character who's in a meeting and they're feeling stressed and anxious, what are details in the room that you could pick out that match that? So maybe the panes they notice that the panes on the window look like bars, or the wallpaper's really busy and makes the ceiling feel low, or there's just various details that will sort of add to that sensation of maybe feeling trapped. So not that the room, details that you could pick out that would emphasize the feel of that room. And then the second part is in the room, or how my character would describe that room, but how that individual person would see it. So for example, and I'm going to pick on Carol because she has a Westie on her lap. If I go into a room and there's the very first thing I will notice. As a writer reader, I always notice what books are on people's shelves. And I am judging people by what books are on their shelves. And I will, make a note of that and sort of, Carol's suddenly paranoid. I sort of thinking about that. So again, if your character goes into a room and they're on a date with someone and you see Trump is the best guy ever biography, what is their take on, are they, more attracted to that person? Are they horrified by that person? What judgments are they making about that person? But they will notice it, right? Particularly if they are a political person or someone who's intrigued in those kinds of issues. There will be things that will make you feel more or less comfortable. I have a friend who is queer, and he talks about, when he's in a downtown area at certain places, he's looking for places, are there rainbow flags or things that are there, where he takes that then as a sign of, this is a place where I feel more safe or secure. So you can imagine if you were gay and you were not from Vancouver and you happened to be walking down Denman Street, you would be picking up and noticing things on that street. You the comfort to be like, you know what, I'm going to reach over and hold my partner's hand because I feel like this is a safe and warm and comfortable place to do that. You could be gay and be walking down another street, and I'm pretty sure you would be picking up if you were in possibly, a rural Indiana place where you might suddenly be like, I'm like, where they had a bunch of signs, family values first, God said Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. So if you were picking up, and you would notice those signs, and you would react and behave differently, even if it wasn't a conscious thing. Myself, you can think about, there are probably spaces that you feel more comfortable within. Like you see them and you instantly feel more comfortable. Oh, these are my people. Or, this is not my place.
I think sometimes people are not necessarily aware, but they're affected by socioeconomic status of other people around them, and always kind of gauging where they fit in the hierarchy. It's a little fuzzier today because we're exposed to so much media and so many images. But even then, I think even if you're browsing on Instagram, there's a kind of you're always gauging, does this person have a lot of money, or does this person have less money? And just in terms of the objects that they have around in their space, and that.
And how important is that to you?
Well, it would vary. It might make someone.
It's going to depend on character to character,
or I don't know, maybe.
Or is that important to you? Like, so you could have one person who might look, and they would say like, oh, that person has a Louis Vuitton handbag, and now I feel insecure because my handbag is from Payless Shoe Store. And they're going to know that I can't afford a Louis Vuitton handbag, and someone else is going to have no idea that that's a Louis Vuitton handbag. Be like, their initials must be VL, right? Like, they're not going to necessarily notice or even pay attention to that detail. It won't point out to them. But again, if you're trying to show someone who is the first time I come from a very middle class background, comfortable, but very middle class. And it was clear to me when I went to my house for the first time, like, oh, they have more money than we do. They belong to a country club. The first time I had dinner with his family, there was more silverware at my place setting than there was at like a full Thanksgiving dinner in my house. So there was like a shrimp fork and a fish fork and there were all these things. And I just remember thinking, I'm going to be that person who like drinks out of the finger bowl. Like I was paranoid the entire time and watching other interactions to make sure I didn't screw this up. Because it was really important to me. And I can remember looking around their house and there would have been details that popped for me because I was looking to be like, how do I fit in versus how do I not fit in? So as you're revising and you're looking at settings and how you describe certain things, yeah, you want to have a beautiful description, and it's lovely if you have, something that's really captures it and it's pulling in the senses. But ask yourself, is there a way that setting can do double or triple duty? So can it be reinforcing the emotional thing about the room? So, are the walls cloud white, bone white, snow white? They might all still be kind of the same shade, but it's going to give a just slightly different feel. And the reader may not even pick up on it in a conscious way, but you're just add a little bit of an extra layer. We have thoughts about that in our house. All right, we are starting to run out of time. So are there any questions or comments on revision? People feeling pretty good about it? All right. So just a reminder, there are no office hours this evening, but if you want to send any questions at any time. And then just a heads up, next week there are no office hours for me at all because I am flying that day. So stay tuned. Yeah, I'll be on a plane and I will not be here. So it is not an opportunity to dial it. But I will be around. It's only on the Tuesday that I'm just basically not available at all. And we're all going to cross fingers because I'm going to be at the Children's Book Awards. So hopefully I will be flying back home smug and happy. So I'll let you know. All right. Any questions?
That's awesome, Eileen. Congratulations.
Oh,
Yes.
Thank you. As they say, it's an honor to be nominated. It's a lot more fun to win. So we will let you know how that goes.
Good luck. Good luck.
We will stay tuned. And I will wear, I don't know how many people you saw it. If you haven't yet seen, there's a wonderful interview with Mary Robinette in the library where she talks about short stories. And in that interview, we talked about, she had a writing tiara that was her cue in home that should not be disturbed. And I mocked her because I was in fact jealous when we did things. So I was like, a writing tiara. And she correctly guessed that I was mocking her because I was consumed with envy. And she got me a tiara you can now wear while writing. Yes, thank you. I feel rather snappy, even though I'm home alone. And so the only people that the only person that I am cueing off is my dogs, who apparently, although now that I've put it on, they're quiet. So perhaps if I put this on sooner,
They're
you
bowing.
had that.
The queen
I
has
think
entered the
everyone
room. Quiet, dogs.
It's quite lovely. Well, it's a shame, Natasha, because she actually had a few tiaras with her. She had spare tiny tiaras that she was passing out to various people who needed them. But yes, I'm going to suggest for all of us, including you, Tony, that everyone invest in their own tiara. It definitely would make people know you were up to something, Tony, and it would give you some space. So.
Yeah.
All right, so a reminder, if you want some of those things, the revision checklist is in the resource library for you, so you can download that. That's there. And we will go from there, and I will talk with Olive Glip.
Okay.
Thank
Have a good one,
Okay,
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.